So I want to I want to break something down and talk about. I want to condense and simplify what I was talking about in the Substack, so we will understand. All right. So this is the gist of where I'm going at in the Substack. All right. I'm going to condense it for you regarding the political spectrum. So every understanding of current politics is underpinned by a political spectrum. The far right forces and the far left forces. The left forces and the right forces. And there's this idea that there's these two sides, right, of the political spectrum, which is a spectrum that is defined by contrasting values or visions for how society should look like. And they're kind of just always battling it out. And that politics is like defined by where that struggle is currently. Like, oh, Chile's moved to the left.
Don't communists differentiate BT private and personal property, private being corporate ownership of the means of production?
Yeah, but yeah, pretty much. That's the simplification. But so there's the political spectrum, right, which is a representation of politics based on values or some kind of like agency with which change or it's basically like a competing versions of socialism, right? Which utopian scenario do we want? What do we want society to look like? Changing society according to our wishes and whims. That's the abstraction that is the political spectrum. It's contrived from this implicit acknowledgement that politics reflects how we want to change society. Even if you're a free market capitalist libertarian, you still want to change society and create a system of free markets and stuff. So it's like there's this presupposition that underlying our economy and our reality and our society is the implementation of will. Okay? So when you go into the origin of modern politics, which is in the French Revolution or the English Civil War, actually, I would say the English Civil War, you're dealing with the breakdown of prior forms of sovereignty, okay? Prior forms of legitimation of power, pretty much. Monarchs, the divine right of kings, all of that is blown up because of the Protestant Reformation. If there's disagreements about religion, then there's also going to be disagreements about the means of the legitimation of the supposedly divinely ordained monarchs, right? That's a good simplification of it. So with that enters a understanding of politics that is derived from the modern view, whether you want to call it rationalistic or otherwise, that, the institutions of sovereignty are man-made and that they're formally accountable to our actions and to our will, okay? You're following me, right? So more or less, the political spectrum comes to be defined purely on the basis of an antinomy or a paradox that is implicit in this formalism. So first and foremost, it's not that people have different ideas about how to govern society arbitrarily, and that's the political spectrum. The division, even beginning with the French Revolution, into left and into right, is based on an antinomy or an irreducible paradox at the heart of politics, okay? Modern politics. And that paradox consists in the following fact. If the basis of political sovereignty lies in will, right, or lies in formalism, or lies in man-made institutions, this obviously, if imposed upon the world, has an effect of change, okay? Change which also upsets, the status quo or the ancien regime. But on the other hand, that upsetting of the ancien regime or the status quo also seems to come at the expense of any stable or permanent kind of order, right? So it's just it's paradox. there's the same metaphysical premise, but it divides into order and it divides into change. And they're both modern, they're both sharing the same premises, but there's just this irreducible distinction between change, transformation, and order. So transformation, changing form, and order, which is what? The order of the form. It's the formality, the formalism, right? And this is basically the basis of the political distinction in modern politics. It's based on that contradiction. So let me put it this way: the superstructure accompanying capitalist mode of production, political superstructure, necessitates this like extremely violent revolution, right? But on the other hand, the premises of that violent revolution have to be rational. They have to be orderly. They have to be based on something solid, something, tangible, something orderly, something fixed in a way, right? So you have this contradiction in politics on that basis. So without even having to do a class analysis, which obviously is necessary, you have to have a holistic picture. But if you want to just isolate politics and you want to understand politics on its own terms, that is an irreducible contradiction. So that's the origin of the modern political distinction, the division. Now, eventually, there comes a point where it seems like this distinction is not tenable anymore. And it's no longer tenable because political change becomes domesticated. Political change, or progressivism as it's called, becomes part of order, becomes part of this status quo and the prevailing order, right? And then modern politics is no longer political. Political distinction ceases to actually really exist. For example, in liberal democracy. In liberal democracies, there are no real political distinctions at the level of the legal form, the overt legal form at least. So if you have a multi-party or parliamentary democracy, at the overt level of legal form, obviously there's no real political distinctions because everyone has already assented and submitted before the real political sovereign. Remember Clausewitz, war is an extension of politics and vice versa. So the political differences are, the stake of political difference is life and death, right? It's the monopoly on violence. All power comes out of the barrel of a gun, right? So in a multi-party democracy or in a parliamentary democracy, there are no real political differences, at least that can be assailed at the level of the overt form of the state. Because the overt form of the state, it's like what Lenin said, right? It's the democracy of the slave owners. That's what he meant by that. Okay? It's not a real difference at the level of bourgeois. The differences that are tolerated within bourgeois democracy are not political differences, at least at the level of the overt form of the state. Okay? So, from there, so we already established the left and right division is based on this. Left is change, and right is order, right? It's just like really some big simplification. So, the difference that actually does manage to emerge with political distinction, real political distinction, which is a return of Clausewitzian politics, then acquires this funny distinction between partisanship as such, and what partisanship as such basically means is that this is what the partisan means. This is my interpretation of Schmidt, right? The partisan does not try to domesticate political differences into a form. A partisan founds their political existence upon a declaration of war. So partisanship means you are an engaged subject in an absolute war, okay? You're not trying to formalize political differences and domesticate them. You acknowledge there is an irreducible and fundamental fight to the death. The Hegelian master-slave dialectic, if you want, right? So that's the partisan. Partisanship is the reintroduction of real politics. Okay? And the first partisan, I'm not going to talk about the first partisan, but Lenin was probably the most prominent first partisan of the 20th century. Lenin wrote on guerrilla warfare very early on in the history of the Russian Revolution. And Lenin basically establishes the Bolshevik Party as a partisan party, right? He doesn't conceive the party as somehow elevated above the class struggle or the political struggle in the way that the Mensheviks did. The Mensheviks thought the party's kind of above it all in a way because it's already being able to foresee the future, which is going to take the form of these different stages of development. It's going to lead to socialism, and then they're going to come in. So Mensheviks are not fully politically engaged subjects, right? They're consigning a lot of what belongs to the party to other forces, other metaphysical forces. That's basically the root of the bourgeois opportunism, right? So that's partisanship. So here stands the partisan. So it's like there's the left, there's this domesticated left and right wing, right? And then this is all one flat political continuity. It's one continuum, okay? Left and right is on the same spectrum. Okay, it's on the same spectrum. Qualitative difference only emerges below at the level of partisanship. So think about the partisan guerrilla underground, think about a ground where it's just flat space. That's the left and right. It's one continuity, right? They're on the same plane. The partisan is on a different dimension, below. Okay, you see? The partisan wants to destroy that political continuum entirely. So why is leftism fascist? To cut to the chase. Because leftism is not left-wing politics in actuality. In actuality, left-wing politics is the politics of change. Leftism is the ideology of the politics of change, which means leftism is the interpretation or the reflexive mediation of the politics of change. It's not actually politics of change, it's the ideology of it, right? So it is going to be limited in its scope by the conception, by the limits of their prejudices, by the limits of their understanding, basically. The limits of leftism are the limits of the understanding from which leftism is contrived. That understanding is within that political continuum up top, right? They're trying to basically domesticate and distill the essence of political change. That means leftism, rather than being something actually partisan, is at its root fundamentally disposed of this veneer of not being political. Think about it. Leftists aren't really political. What they actually are, in terms of how they present themselves, is that they're moral, right? Or they're activistic, or they're charitable, or whatever. But they never actually say, "We are here. We're fighting for power." They don't. That's not where they are, right? AOC, she just fucking kisses Biden's ass. Bernie, same thing. He's a cuckold. They're not political. These aren't political agendas. They're moral or whatever agendas, right? So leftism ends up being this extra legal and extra formal ideology of the formal modern bourgeois state, which seeks to explain the basis of the modern bourgeois state. It seeks to explain it in terms of the ideology of change. Not actual change, mind you, but the ideology of change, okay? So leftism has acquired a status very much analogous and comparable to what fascism was functionally. Fascism was the same thing. Fascism did not present itself as actually political. It was a meta-politics of some kind, right? Fascism was this meta-politics according to which it was trying to deal with the state as such, the order as such, the nation as such. Not a specific point of political struggle, but some kind of false veneer of being above politics. It's actually the basis of fascist syncretism, where they say like neither left nor right, but third position or whatever. I know third position can mean a lot of things, but when the Italian fascists were saying neither left nor right, but that's what they meant, right? Now, the leftism seems like it's on the left because it's leftism. But there has been an acute discontinuity between the actual left-wing alignment, which is in reality a misalignment because it entails revolutionary change, with its ideology, the way that it's represented by modern consciousness. So leftism is pretty much this retrospect of the ruling class. Can I put it this way, guys? I'm going to just simplify it, right? The Bolsheviks take power in Russia. There's a huge revolutionary workers' movement throughout Europe. And then the lumpen, whatever, bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call it, they have a retrospect. What's the essence of all of these things that happened? And that retrospect was fascism, which tried to distill the essence of revolutionary change. Benjamin calls it the aestheticization of politics, trying to appropriate and therefore dissolve its basis of power and potency by absorbing it according to their own narrow and limited understanding and conception. Well, leftism is fascism at the end of history. Okay? So the idea of the end of history is that we are at this crucial point in which the entire meaning, purpose of the whole modern era, and all of human history at that is now under question, right? So the reason it's leftism is because they're basically doing a retrospect on the essence of all political change since the beginning of the modernity, basically. That's leftist ideology. It's a retrospect. It's a throwback, right? It's not a continuity with the revolutionary tradition. It's a throwback upon the whole revolutionary tradition. And it is deriving the conclusion that the thread that unites the whole revolutionary tradition throughout all of history is this kind of abstract negation of the modern state, right? The bourgeois state. So it is in a Benjaminian sense an actual aestheticization of politics. It is a it's kind of extra formalization of politics beyond the bounds of legal statehood. Form, remember, is the sphere of aesthetics. So this is a formalization of revolutionary change, which obviously is not possible within the sphere of the bourgeois formal state, because the bourgeois formal state tries to formalize the change only once, right? But in the era of globalism, where you have the emergence of this power that is beyond sovereign modern states, there's just this kind of total retrospect on the history of political modernity in general. And that's what leftist ideology is. So leftism is the ideology, basically this, leftism is fascism in the age of globality. It's fascism in the age of globalism. Because fascism tried to appropriate the essence of revolutionary change in the form of nationalism. Because the nation was the community that corresponded to these revolutionary changes that are the founding gesture of modern politics. But in the age of globalism, which is supranational, even that does not suffice. Instead of nationalism, you have this kind of a-nationalism, if you want to make up a new word, of this global citizen, abstract subject, which principally manifests itself in the form of, members of the open society. That's why all of this gets condensed in Ukraine, right? Did you see how Reddit's cheering on, oh, Ukraine, Ukraine? That's a condensation of the globalist version of the fascist nationalism, right? But since it's globalist, it's not going to be a specific form of nationalism. It's just going to be this kind of, global citizen, right? But that can get condensed. All of the chauvinism of the open society gets fully condensed, for example, in Ukraine. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. But I only slept for 2 hours, so maybe this is not the right time. Anyway, guys, I do have to go. Bye-bye!